The year was 1885, and the steel mills of Pittsburgh painted the sky in shades of amber and grey. Inside the grand mansion overlooking the Allegheny River, Theodore Blackwood paced the length of his oak-panelled study, his polished boots clicking against the hardwood floors. At 32, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming his father's modest foundry into one of Pennsylvania's most profitable steel operations. But success had come with a price his mother was determined to collect. "Theodore, you cannot continue to postpone this matter," declared Margaret Blackwood from her velvet armchair, her steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun that matched her disposition. "The Whitmore family expects an answer by week's end. Their daughter Charlotte is perfectly suitable, well-bred, and brings a substantial dowry that would benefit our interests in the railroad expansion." Theodore paused by the tall windows, watching the smokestacks of his factories pierce the evening sky. The marriage his mother proposed was nothing more than a business transaction, a merger of fortunes that would secure their position among Pittsburgh's industrial elite. Charlotte Whitmore was pleasant enough, he supposed, but their conversations never ventured beyond discussions of the weather and society gossip. "Mother, I appreciate the strategic advantages, but surely there must be more to marriage than financial gain," he replied, loosening his silk necktie. The day had been long, filled with meetings about new safety regulations and labor disputes that seemed to grow more complex by the month. Margaret's expression hardened. "Romance is a luxury for those without responsibilities, Theodore. You have an obligation to this family, to our workers, and to the future of Blackwood Steel. Charlotte Whitmore understands her role as the wife of an industrialist." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. "Come in," Theodore called, grateful for any distraction from his mother's persistent matchmaking. The door opened to reveal a young woman Theodore had never seen before. She wore a simple navy blue dress with white collar and cuffs, her chestnut hair arranged modestly beneath a small hat. Her green eyes held intelligence and determination that immediately caught his attention. "Forgive the interruption," she said with a slight curtsy, her voice carrying a subtle Irish accent. "I am Miss Catherine O'Brien, the new governess for your nephew. I was told to report to Mrs. Blackwood upon my arrival." Margaret rose from her chair, studying the newcomer with the sharp gaze she typically reserved for evaluating potential business investments. "Yes, Miss O'Brien. My grandson Robert has proven quite challenging for his previous tutors. I trust you come with excellent references." "Indeed, ma'am. I have successfully educated 3 children of prominent Boston families, and I hold certificates in literature, mathematics, and French from the Sacred Heart Academy." Catherine's posture remained perfectly straight as she spoke, neither intimidated by the opulent surroundings nor Margaret's stern demeanour. Theodore found himself studying the governess with unexpected interest. Unlike the fashionable ladies who frequented his mother's social gatherings, Miss O'Brien possessed a natural grace that required no artifice. Her hands, though gloved, appeared capable, and her direct gaze suggested a mind unafraid of challenges. "Your quarters have been prepared on the 3rd floor," Margaret continued. "You will find young Robert can be quite willful. His parents' untimely death in that railway accident last year has left him somewhat difficult to manage. I understand completely, Mrs. Blackwood. Loss at such a young age requires patience and understanding rather than harsh discipline." Catherine's response revealed both compassion and confidence in her abilities. As the governess turned to leave, Theodore stepped forward impulsively. "Miss O'Brien, perhaps you would join us for dinner this evening. I would like to hear more about your educational philosophy, given Robert's importance to this family." Margaret's eyebrows rose sharply at this breach of social protocol. Governesses typically took their meals in their rooms or with the kitchen staff, not at the family table. But Theodore was master of the house, and his word carried final authority. "That is very kind, Mr. Blackwood, though I would not wish to impose," Catherine replied, a faint blush colouring her cheeks. "Nonsense. 8 o'clock in the dining room." Theodore's smile was warmer than any he had offered in months of social obligations and business meetings. As Catherine departed to settle into her quarters, Margaret fixed her son with a disapproving stare. "Theodore, I hope you are not developing any inappropriate ideas about the help. The Whitmore arrangement requires your full attention, but..." Theodore was already thinking about dinner conversation with someone whose intelligence might prove more stimulating than discussions of Pittsburgh, society's latest fashions. For the first time in months, he found himself genuinely looking forward to an evening at home, The Blackwood dining room gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers, their flames reflecting off polished mahogany and fine china that had been imported from England. Theodore adjusted his formal dinner jacket as he waited, finding himself unusually concerned about the evening's conversation. It had been months since he had looked forward to dining at home, rather than viewing it as another social obligation. Catherine appeared promptly at 8 o'clock, having changed into a modest black dress with simple pearl buttons. Her hair was arranged in a neat chignon, and she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the grandeur of her surroundings. Theodore noticed she paused briefly at the doorway, taking in the formal table setting with its multiple courses and array of silver utensils. "Miss O'Brien, please take a seat," Theodore said, rising to pull out her chair. The gesture surprised both Catherine and the butler, who had moved forward to perform the same service. Such courtesies were rarely extended to household staff. Margaret entered the dining room with obvious disapproval etched across her features, but she maintained proper decorum as they began the meal. The first course was a delicate turtle soup, served in fine porcelain bowls that probably cost more than Catherine's monthly salary. "Tell me about your previous position in Boston," Theodore began, genuinely curious about the woman who had accepted the challenging task of educating his troubled nephew. "I worked for the Henderson family on Beacon Hill," Catherine replied, carefully managing her soup spoon with practiced elegance. Their eldest daughter was preparing for finishing school, while the younger children needed foundational education in classics and mathematics. The work was quite rewarding, though I felt called to seek a position where I might make a greater difference. "And what brought you to Pittsburgh?" Margaret interjected, her tone suggesting she found the governess's presence at their table highly irregular. Catherine set down her spoon thoughtfully. "I received word that young Robert had lost both parents and was struggling with his studies. Having experienced similar loss in my own childhood, I felt perhaps I might understand his needs better than someone who had not faced such challenges." Theodore leaned forward with interest. "You lost your parents young as well?" "My father died in a factory accident when I was 12, Catherine said quietly, her composure never wavering despite the painful memory. "My mother worked as a seamstress to support us, but consumption took her when I was 16. The church helped me secure education through their charity programs." The honesty of her response struck Theodore powerfully. Here was someone who understood genuine hardship, unlike the sheltered society ladies he typically encountered. Her education and refinement had been earned through determination rather than birthright. "How terribly difficult that must have been," Margaret commented, though her tone suggested more curiosity than sympathy. "And yet you managed to secure such excellent references. Education became my salvation." "Mrs. Blackwood, the sisters at Sacred Heart saw potential in me and provided opportunities I might never have had otherwise. I believe every child deserves that same chance, regardless of their circumstances." As the second course arrived, roasted duck with cherry sauce, Theodore found himself drawn deeper into conversation with Catherine. She spoke knowledgeably about literature, having read works by Dickens and George Eliot that many society ladies avoided as too serious. Her opinions on education were thoughtful and progressive, emphasizing understanding and encouragement rather than strict discipline. "I believe children learn best when they feel safe and valued," Catherine explained as she delicately cut her duck. "Young Robert has experienced tremendous upheaval. Before we can address his academic struggles, we must help him feel secure again." "A sensible approach," Theodore agreed, impressed by her insight. Too many tutors seem to believe that harsh discipline alone will produce results. Margaret observed this exchange with growing concern. Her son was clearly engaged by the governess in a way that was entirely inappropriate given their respective social positions. Moreover, the Whitmore arrangement could not afford such distractions. "Miss O'Brien," Margaret interjected smoothly, "I trust you understand that Robert's education is your sole responsibility here. We would not want any complications to interfere with your important work." Catherine met the older woman's gaze directly. "Of course, Mrs. Blackwood. I take my professional obligations very seriously." But Theodore was barely listening to his mother's pointed warnings. As Catherine spoke about her hopes for Robert's progress, he found himself captivated by her passion for her work and her genuine care for others. Her eyes lit up when she discussed education, and her smile transformed her entire face, when she mentioned small victories with previous students. The evening progressed through several more courses, with conversation flowing naturally despite Margaret's attempts to steer topics toward more conventional subjects. Catherine proved well informed about current events, including the recent labor strikes that had affected several Pittsburgh factories. Her perspective, informed by her working-class background, offered insights that Theodore had never considered. The workers simply want fair wages for dangerous work, Catherine observed carefully. Many risk their lives daily in conditions that would terrify those who have never set foot in a factory. Theodore nodded thoughtfully. You speak from experience, I assume. My father died when unsafe machinery was not properly maintained to save costs. Such tragedies could often be prevented with proper investment in worker safety. As the final course concluded, Theodore realized the evening had passed more quickly and pleasantly than any social gathering he had attended in months. Catherine's intelligence, compassion, and strength had created an impression far deeper than he had anticipated. Thank you for a delightful evening, Miss O'Brien, he said as they rose from the table. I look forward to hearing about Robert's progress. Catherine curtsied gracefully. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Blackwood. I shall begin Robert's lessons tomorrow morning. As she departed for her quarters, Theodore caught his mother's disapproving expression and steeled himself for the conversation that would surely follow. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine's arrival, and the Blackwood household had settled into new rhythms. Each morning, Theodore found himself lingering over breakfast longer than necessary, hoping to catch glimpses of Catherine as she guided young Robert through the gardens or helped him with lessons in the morning room. The boy's transformation had been remarkable, his sullen defiance gradually giving way to genuine curiosity under Catherine's patient guidance. Theodore had taken to reviewing factory reports in the library during Robert's afternoon lessons, a room that happened to offer an excellent view of the garden where Catherine often took her student for nature studies. He told himself it was merely professional interest in his nephew's education, but the truth was more complicated. Catherine's laughter drifting through the open windows had become a welcome sound in a house that had known too little joy since Robert's parents' death. Uncle Theodore. Robert burst into the library one afternoon, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Catherine taught me about the steel-making process, and I drew diagrams of how the furnaces work. Would you like to see? Theodore set aside his ledger, genuinely pleased by his nephew's enthusiasm. The boy had barely spoken to anyone for months following the tragedy, yet now he chattered eagerly about his lessons. I would be delighted to see your work, Robert. Catherine appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless from trying to keep pace with her energetic student. I apologize, Mr. Blackwood. Robert was so eager to share his project that he ran ahead before I could stop him. Please, come in, Theodore insisted, rising from his desk. I'm impressed that you've incorporated industrial processes into his education. I thought he might connect better with subjects that relate to his family's business, Catherine explained, smoothing her grey wool dress as she approached. Understanding how steel is made helps him appreciate the mathematics and chemistry behind it. Robert spread his carefully drawn diagrams across Theodore's desk, explaining each step with remarkable accuracy for a 10-year-old. Theodore was struck by how Catherine had managed to make complex industrial processes accessible to a child's mind while maintaining scientific accuracy. This is excellent work, Robert, Theodore praised, ruffling his nephew's hair. Perhaps tomorrow you could visit one of our smaller foundries to see these processes in action. Really? Robert's eyes widened with delight. Miss Catherine, did you hear? We're going to see real steel being made. Catherine smiled warmly at the boy's excitement, and Theodore felt his heart skip unexpectedly at the sight. That sounds like a wonderful educational opportunity, she agreed. We shall have to prepare by studying safety protocols and proper foundry behavior. As Robert gathered his drawings, chattering about everything he wanted to see at the foundry, Theodore found himself making an impulsive decision. Miss O'Brien, perhaps you would join us for the tour. Your insights into worker conditions might provide valuable perspective for Robert's education. Catherine hesitated, clearly surprised by the invitation. Such outings were typically family affairs, not occasions for household staff. I would not wish to intrude on your time with Robert, Mr. Blackwood. Nonsense. You're his teacher, and this is clearly an extension of his lessons. Theodore's reasoning sounded logical enough, though he knew his motives were far more personal than professional. That evening, as Catherine helped Robert prepare for bed, The boy confided his growing attachment to his governess. "I'm glad you came to live with us, Miss Catherine. You make everything more interesting." "I'm glad too, Robert," Catherine replied softly, tucking the blankets around him. "Your progress has been remarkable. Your parents would be very proud." Downstairs, Theodore faced another confrontation with his mother, who had observed the afternoon's interactions with mounting alarm. "Theodore, your behavior with that governess is becoming quite inappropriate," Margaret declared as they sat in the parlor after dinner. "The servants are beginning to talk, and I've received inquiries from Charlotte Whitmore's mother about the wedding arrangements." "I've made no commitment to Charlotte," Theodore replied firmly, "and my interactions with Miss O'Brien are entirely proper. She's doing excellent work with Robert. Your interest in her goes far beyond Robert's education, and we both know it," Margaret snapped. "She's a servant, Theodore, regardless of her education or refinement. The scandal of such an association would ruin our family's reputation and destroy your business relationships." Theodore stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames as he considered his mother's words. Everything she said was true from a social standpoint. A relationship between a factory owner and a governess would indeed cause scandal, yet he could not dismiss the feelings that had been growing stronger each day. "Mother, I understand your concerns about reputation and business alliances," he said finally, "but I will not be forced into a loveless marriage simply to satisfy society's expectations." "Love." Margaret's voice rose sharply. "Theodore, you barely know this woman. She's been here less than a month. This infatuation will pass, but the damage to our family's standing could be permanent." Before Theodore could respond, a soft knock interrupted their heated discussion. Catherine appeared in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable at having overheard portions of their conversation. "Forgive me for disturbing you," she said quietly. "Robert had a nightmare about his parents' accident. He's asking for you, Mr. Blackwood." Theodore immediately moved toward the door, his concern for his nephew overriding all other considerations. As he passed Catherine, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected shock of warmth through both of them. The moment lasted only seconds, but it was enough for Margaret to witness the unmistakable spark between them. In Robert's room, Theodore sat beside the bed while Catherine prepared warm milk with honey, a remedy she had learned from her own childhood. The boy clung to his uncle's hand as he recounted his dream, the same recurring nightmare that had plagued him for months. "The train kept crashing over and over," Robert whispered, "and I couldn't make it stop." Catherine sat on the opposite side of the bed, her voice gentle as she spoke. "Dreams can feel very real, Robert, but they cannot hurt you. Your parents are at peace now, and they would want you to be happy." Theodore watched as she comforted the frightened child with natural grace and genuine compassion. In that moment, he realized his feelings for Catherine had grown far beyond mere attraction. She possessed qualities he had never found in any society lady: strength, kindness, intelligence, and an ability to bring out the best in everyone around her. As Robert finally drifted back to sleep, Theodore and Catherine stood together in the hallway outside his room. The house was quiet around them, and the intimacy of the moment felt both natural and dangerous. "Thank you," Theodore said softly. "You have a gift with him." "He's a wonderful boy," Catherine replied. "He simply needed someone to understand his pain." Their eyes met in the dim lamplight, and Theodore felt the overwhelming urge to tell her everything, about his growing feelings, about the arranged marriage his mother was pushing, about his desire to know her better, despite the impossible social barriers between them. But the sound of his mother's footsteps on the stairs reminded him of the complications such honesty would create. "Good night, Miss O'Brien," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed far more than his words. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," Catherine replied, her cheeks flushed as she retreated to her own quarters. Neither of them noticed Margaret watching from the shadows, her expression grim as she witnessed the tender scene between her son and the governess. The morning of the foundry visit dawned grey and cold, with autumn mist rising from the Allegheny River. Catherine had spent extra time preparing Robert for the outing, ensuring he understood the importance of staying close to the adults and following all safety instructions. She wore her most practical dress, a dark brown wool that would not show the inevitable soot and grime of the industrial setting. Theodore arrived at the breakfast table earlier than usual, dressed in work clothes rather than his typical formal attire. The sight of him in simple cotton shirt and sturdy trousers, looking more like a working man than a wealthy industrialist, sent an unexpected flutter through Catherine's chest. "Are you ready for your adventure, Robert?" Theodore asked his nephew, who was practically bouncing with excitement in his chair. "Miss Catherine made me promise to stay right beside you both and not touch anything without permission," Robert recited dutifully, "and she taught me about the different types of furnaces we might see." "Excellent preparation," Theodore approved, his eyes meeting Catherine's with warm appreciation. "Shall we depart?" The carriage ride to the foundry provided ample opportunity for Robert to pepper his uncle with questions about steel production, while Catherine found herself increasingly aware of Theodore's presence beside her. When the carriage hit a particularly rough patch of road, his steadying hand on her arm sent warmth spreading through her entire body. The Blackwood foundry was smaller than the main steelworks, but still impressive in its organized chaos. Workers moved with practiced efficiency between the glowing furnaces and massive hammers, their faces streaked with sweat despite the October chill. Theodore proved to be an excellent guide, explaining each process in terms Robert could understand while ensuring their safety at every step. Catherine was struck by how the workers responded to Theodore's presence. Unlike many factory owners who ruled through fear and intimidation, he greeted several men by name and inquired about their families. His genuine concern for worker welfare was evident in the safety measures he had implemented and the respect he commanded without demanding. "Mr. Blackwood," a gruff voice called out over the din of machinery. "Didn't expect to see you here today." Theodore turned to greet his floor supervisor, a burly man named Patrick O'Malley, whose Irish accent reminded Catherine painfully of her late father. "Patrick, I'd like you to meet my nephew Robert and his governess, Miss O'Brien. We're giving the boy a practical education in steel production." Patrick's weathered face broke into a smile as he crouched to Robert's eye level. "Well now, young master, your uncle runs the finest foundry in all of Pittsburgh. We take pride in our work here." As Patrick explained the intricacies of temperature control to an fascinated Robert, Catherine found herself in quiet conversation with Theodore about worker conditions and safety improvements. Her questions were insightful, born from personal experience with industrial accidents, and Theodore found her perspective invaluable. "You've implemented more safety measures than most owners," Catherine observed, watching workers use protective equipment that was clearly well maintained. "My father would have appreciated such consideration." "Every worker here has a family depending on him," Theodore replied seriously. "Profits built on preventable suffering are not worth having." Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Margaret Blackwood swept into the foundry accompanied by Charlotte Whitmore and her parents, all dressed in their finest attire despite the industrial setting. "Theodore," Margaret called out, her voice carrying clearly over the machinery noise. "What a delightful surprise to find you here. The Whitmores were eager to see your operations, and I thought today would be perfect for a tour." Theodore's jaw tightened as he realized his mother's true purpose. She had orchestrated this encounter to force him into a public display of commitment to Charlotte, while simultaneously humiliating Catherine by emphasizing her servant status. Charlotte approached with practiced grace, her silk dress and elaborate hat completely inappropriate for a foundry visit. "Theodore, how wonderful to see you again. Mother said you might be here with Robert today." "Miss Whitmore," Theodore replied stiffly, offering a perfunctory bow. "This is indeed unexpected." Robert, oblivious to the adult tensions swirling around him, piped up enthusiastically. "Miss Catherine has been teaching me all about steel production. She's the best teacher ever." Charlotte's eyes narrowed as she took in Catherine's presence for the first time. "How charming, and you are?" "Miss O'Brien, Robert's governess," Catherine replied quietly, instinctively stepping slightly behind Theodore as social protocol demanded. "Of course," Charlotte's tone carried subtle disdain. "I'm sure you're quite adequate for such work." The insult hit its mark, and Catherine's cheeks flushed with humiliation. Theodore felt a surge of protective anger at Charlotte's casual cruelty, but before he could respond, Margaret smoothly intervened. "Theodore, the Whitmores are hosting a dinner party next week to announce some exciting family news," Margaret said meaningfully. "I assured them you would be delighted to attend." The trap was closing around him. Theodore realized that his mother intended to force an engagement announcement at that dinner party, using social pressure and business obligations to compel his compliance. The presence of the Whitmore family at his foundry was meant to demonstrate their suitability as partners in both marriage and business. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full next week," Theodore replied carefully. "Perhaps we should discuss this later in private." "Nonsense." Charlotte's father, William Whitmore, stepped forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Business can wait for matters of the heart, Theodore? Our families have much to celebrate." The implication was clear. The marriage arrangement was considered settled, despite Theodore's lack of formal proposal. Catherine felt her heart sink as she witnessed the social forces aligning against any possibility of happiness with the man she had grown to love. As the group moved deeper into the foundry for a proper tour, Catherine found herself walking behind the others, her position as a servant painfully reinforced by the presence of Theodore's intended bride. She watched Charlotte cling to Theodore's arm possessively, marking her territory for all to see. The tour concluded with the Whitmores expressing appropriate amazement at the industrial processes, though their interest was clearly superficial. As they prepared to depart, Margaret made her final move. "Theodore, why don't you escort Charlotte back to our carriage? I'll see that Robert and his governess return safely in the other vehicle." The dismissal was absolute. Catherine was being relegated to her proper place, while Theodore was expected to play the attentive suitor. But as Charlotte moved to take his arm, Theodore made a decision that would change everything. "Actually, Mother, I need to discuss some technical matters with Miss O'Brien regarding Robert's education," he said firmly. "Perhaps Charlotte could ride with you while I complete my business here." Margaret's eyes flashed with anger at this public defiance, but she could hardly make a scene in front of the Whitmores. "Of course, dear. Don't be too long." As the carriages departed with their respective passengers, Theodore found himself alone in the foundry with Catherine and Robert. The boy had wandered off to examine a display of different steel samples under Patrick's supervision, leaving the two adults in relative privacy. "Miss O'Brien," Theodore began urgently, "I need you to understand something about what just happened here." Catherine shook her head, her composure finally cracking. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand perfectly. Miss Whitmore is a lovely woman who will make you an excellent wife. Your mother is right to encourage the match. Is that what you truly think?" Theodore stepped closer, his voice intense. "That I could be happy with someone like Charlotte after knowing you?" The raw honesty in his voice made Catherine's breath catch. "What we want and what society allows are two different things, Mr. Blackwood. I am a governess, and you are a factory owner. The gulf between us cannot be bridged. What if I don't care about society's rules?" Theodore demanded, moving even closer until he could see the golden flecks in her green eyes. "What if I've fallen in love with a woman who challenges my mind and touches my heart in ways I never thought possible?" Before Catherine could protest or reason with him, Theodore cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with desperate passion. The kiss was everything their careful propriety had forbidden, hungry, tender, and filled with all the emotions they had been forced to suppress. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, the industrial noise around them forgotten. Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This only makes everything more impossible," she whispered. "Your mother will never accept me, and Miss Whitmore's family expects an engagement. You'll ruin yourself for someone who can give you nothing but scandal." Theodore's hands remained on her face, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. "You give me everything that matters, Catherine. The question is whether you feel the same way." Before Catherine could answer, Robert's excited voice called out from across the foundry, reminding them both of the world waiting outside their stolen moment. The kiss had changed everything and nothing. They now knew their feelings were mutual, but the obstacles to their happiness remained insurmountable. The week following the foundry incident passed in a torment of stolen glances and careful avoidance. Catherine threw herself into Robert's education with renewed vigour, hoping that focusing on her duties would quiet the memory of Theodore's kiss. But every evening brought the inevitable encounter at dinner, where she struggled to maintain professional composure while her heart raced at his proximity. Theodore, meanwhile, found himself in an impossible position. His mother had formally accepted the Whitmores' dinner invitation on his behalf, and the entire Pittsburgh social circle now anticipated an engagement announcement. Business associates congratulated him on his excellent choice, while Charlotte had begun discussing wedding plans with presumptuous confidence. The ceremony should be held at Trinity Cathedral. "Naturally," Charlotte declared during one of her increasingly frequent visits to the Blackwood mansion. "Mother thinks a spring wedding would be lovely. Perhaps in May when the weather is more predictable. Theodore nodded absently. His attention focused on the sounds of laughter drifting from the garden where Catherine was teaching Robert about botanical specimens. Charlotte's voice seemed to fade into meaningless noise compared to the genuine joy he heard in Catherine's interactions with his nephew. "Theodore, are you listening to me?" Charlotte's sharp tone brought his attention back to the conversation. "I was asking about your preferences for the honeymoon destination. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I have a great deal on my mind with business matters," he apologized, though his distraction had nothing to do with steel production and everything to do with a certain Irish governess. Margaret observed these interactions with growing alarm. Her son's disinterest in his intended bride was becoming obvious even to Charlotte, who had begun making pointed comments about Theodore's distracted behavior. Something had to be done before the situation deteriorated. Further, the crisis came to a head on Thursday evening when Margaret discovered Catherine in the library, helping Robert with his penmanship exercises. The sight of the governess, in what Margaret considered the family's private space, triggered her long-simmering resentment. "Miss O'Brien, I believe Robert's lessons should be conducted in the schoolroom, not in areas reserved for family use," Margaret said coldly. Catherine looked up from Robert's copybook, her cheeks flushing at the rebuke. "I apologize, Mrs. Blackwood. Robert mentioned wanting to research his family history, and I thought the library would provide appropriate resources." "Robert, go to your room and prepare for bed," Margaret ordered. "Miss O'Brien and I need to have a private conversation." The boy glanced uncertainly between the two women, sensing the tension in the air. "But we haven't finished my lesson yet, and Miss Catherine promised to help me find information about Father's railroad work." "Now, Robert," Margaret's tone brooked no argument. After Robert reluctantly departed, Margaret closed the library door and faced Catherine with undisguised hostility. "Miss O'Brien, your employment here is no longer suitable for this family's needs." Catherine had been expecting this conversation since the foundry incident, but hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. "May I ask what I have done to displease you, Mrs. Blackwood? Robert's progress has been excellent, and I believe I have fulfilled all my professional obligations." "Your professional obligations, yes," Margaret sneered, "but you have overstepped appropriate boundaries in other areas. I am not blind to what is developing between you and my son. I have maintained complete propriety in all my interactions with Mr. Blackwood," Catherine replied steadily, though her heart was pounding. "Propriety?" Margaret laughed harshly. "Do you think I haven't noticed the way you look at each other? The way Theodore's behavior has changed since your arrival? You have been deliberately undermining an arrangement that is crucial to this family's future." Catherine lifted her chin defiantly. "I have never encouraged Mr. Blackwood in any inappropriate behavior. If he has doubts about his engagement to Miss Whitmore, perhaps those concerns have nothing to do with me." "How dare you!" Margaret's composure finally cracked. "You are a servant in this house, nothing more. Theodore's infatuation will pass once you are no longer here to encourage it. I want you packed and gone by tomorrow morning." The library door burst open as Theodore entered, having overheard the raised voices from the hallway. "Mother, what is the meaning of this?" "I am dismissing Miss O'Brien," Margaret replied icily. "Her services are no longer required." Theodore's face darkened with anger. "On what grounds?" "Robert's education has never been better managed. The grounds are none of your concern. I manage the household staff, and I have made my decision." Theodore looked at Catherine, who stood frozen beside the desk, her face pale but composed. In that moment, he realized he faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could allow his mother to drive away the woman he loved, marry Charlotte as expected, and live a life of comfortable misery. Or he could fight for his happiness, regardless of the social consequences. "Miss O'Brien will not be dismissed," Theodore declared firmly. "In fact, her position in this household is about to change significantly." Margaret stared at her son in shock. "Theodore, what are you saying?" Theodore moved to stand beside Catherine, his decision crystallizing with each word. "I am saying that I will not marry Charlotte Whitmore. I will not sacrifice my happiness for a business arrangement, no matter how advantageous it might appear." "You cannot be serious," Margaret whispered. "The scandal will ruin us. No decent family will associate with us if you marry a governess." "Then we will create our own society," Theodore replied, taking Catherine's trembling hand in his. "I have discovered that love and genuine partnership matter more than social acceptance." Catherine tried to pull her hand away, her practical nature warring with her heart. "Theodore, please consider what you are saying. Your mother is right about the consequences. I cannot let you destroy your future for me." "You are my future, Catherine," Theodore said, turning to face her fully. These past weeks have shown me what true happiness looks like. I refuse to settle for anything less. Margaret's face had gone white with rage. If you persist in this madness, Theodore, you will be cut off completely. No financial support, no business connections, nothing. You will lose everything our family has built. Theodore was quiet for a long moment, weighing his mother's threat against his feelings for Catherine. Then he smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. Mother, I built this business with my own hands and mind. The Blackwood Steel Company belongs to me, not to you or to Pittsburgh society. If our current associates cannot accept my choice in a wife, I will find others who value character over pedigree. He turned back to Catherine, dropping to one knee right there in the library, still holding her hand. Catherine O'Brien, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise you will never want for anything, and together we will build a life based on love and mutual respect. Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she looked at this remarkable man who was willing to risk everything for her. Theodore, I love you more than I ever thought possible, but no conditions. Theodore interrupted gently. Just yes or no. Will you marry me? Catherine looked into his eyes and saw her entire future reflected there. Not just love, but partnership, adventure, and the chance to build something meaningful together. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Theodore, I will marry you. Theodore rose and swept Catherine into his arms, spinning her around the library as she laughed through her tears. Margaret watched in horror as her carefully laid plans crumbled around her. You will both regret this, she declared, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Deep down, she could see that her son had never looked happier than he did at this moment. The engagement announcement sent shockwaves through Pittsburgh society, just as Margaret had predicted. The Whitmores were furious. Several business associates expressed their disapproval, and many society matrons refused to acknowledge the match. But Theodore and Catherine faced the criticism together, supported by the workers at the foundry who respected their boss's courage, and by the handful of progressive thinkers who admired the love match. 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony attended by those who truly mattered to them. Robert, who served as ring bearer, Patrick O'Malley and other loyal employees, and even Margaret, who had eventually come to appreciate Catherine's strength and intelligence. Charlotte Whitmore married a railroad heir and claimed she had never truly wanted Theodore anyway. As they stood together in the garden of their new home, watching Robert play with the neighbor children, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Do you ever regret choosing love over convenience? She asked Theodore. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Never. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A true partner, genuine happiness, and a family built on love rather than obligation. Catherine smiled, her hand resting on her gently rounded belly where their first child was growing. I love you, Theodore Blackwood. And I love you, Catherine Blackwood, he replied. And in the golden light of the Pittsburgh sunset, their future stretched before them bright with possibility. The end.